I stood outside Madison's apartment door, clutching an envelope that contained $15,000 in cash. My younger sister's 25th birthday deserved something special, and after months of her tearful phone calls about overdue rent, I had decided to give her the ultimate gift: 12 full months of covered housing costs. When she opened the door and saw the thick envelope, her eyes lit up with excitement. But the moment I explained what was inside, her expression twisted into disgust. She snatched the envelope from my hands and hurled it back at my face, bills scattering across the hallway floor. "Choose something better and come back in a year," she screamed before slamming the door. I left without saying a word, my heart shattered. Exactly 1 week later, Madison was evicted. Walking back to my car that evening, I couldn't stop the memories from flooding back. This wasn't the first time Madison had crushed my attempts to help her. Growing up in suburban Phoenix, I had always been the responsible older sister 3 years ahead of Madison, but somehow always in her shadow. Our parents, Linda and Robert, had made it clear from the beginning that Madison was their precious baby, the unexpected surprise child who could do no wrong. I remembered being 8 years old, carefully saving my allowance for months to buy a special doll I had seen at the toy store. The day I finally had enough money, Madison threw a tantrum because she wanted it too. Instead of teaching her patience or the value of saving our parents, simply bought her the same doll and told me I should be happy to share. That became the pattern of our entire childhood. Madison wanted something, Madison got it, and I was expected to smile and be the understanding big sister. The pattern continued through high school, where Madison somehow convinced our parents that she needed the car more than I did, despite the fact that I had a job and better grades. She would borrow my clothes without asking, ruin them, and face no consequences. When friends came over, she would insert herself into our activities until gradually they became more interested in the charming, carefree younger sister than the serious, studious older one. But nothing prepared me for what happened during my junior year of college at Arizona State University. I had been dating Marcus Thompson for almost 2 years. He was my first real love, a pre-med student with kind eyes and big dreams. We talked about getting married after graduation, maybe moving to California together where he could do his residency. I trusted him completely, which made what happened next feel like a knife to the heart. During spring break, Marcus came home with me to meet my family properly. Madison, then 18 and fresh out of high school, turned on every ounce of charm she possessed. She wore my clothes, borrowed my makeup, and somehow convinced Marcus to take her on what she called sibling bonding activities while I was at my campus job. By the time the week was over, Marcus was looking at me differently. Within a month, he had broken up with me and started dating Madison. The betrayal cut deeper than just losing a boyfriend. Madison knew how much Marcus meant to me. She had heard me talking about our future plans, had seen the promise ring he gave me, had watched me carefully save money for a graduation trip we had planned together. She destroyed all of that without a second thought, and when I confronted her, she just shrugged and said, "You weren't right for each other anyway. I did you a favor." My graduation from college should have been one of the happiest days of my life. I had earned a degree in marketing with a 3.8 GPA, had landed a job at a respected firm in Denver, and was ready to start my adult life. I planned a small celebration at our family home, inviting my closest college friends and a few relatives. Everything was perfect until Madison showed up with Marcus as her date. She had planned it deliberately, I realized later. She knew exactly how much it would hurt to see them together at my celebration, knew that it would overshadow my achievement and make the day about her drama instead. When Marcus tried to approach me to talk privately, Madison loudly announced their engagement, complete with a ring that looked suspiciously similar to the one he had given me. My graduation party became their engagement announcement, and once again, I was expected to smile and be happy for them. That night, I made the decision to move to Denver immediately after graduation, instead of spending the summer at home as planned. I needed distance from the toxic dynamic that had poisoned my entire childhood. Madison's relationship with Marcus lasted exactly 3 months after I left. Apparently, without me around to torment, she lost interest in him quickly. In Denver, I threw myself into building a career and a life that was entirely my own. I worked long hours, took on challenging projects, and slowly climbed the ladder at my marketing firm. I made genuine friendships with people who appreciated my loyalty and dependability. I dated men who treated me with respect and kindness. For the first time in my life, I experienced what it felt like to be valued for who I was rather than what I could give. But family guilt is a powerful force. Despite everything Madison had done, I still felt responsible for her well-being. When our parents called to tell me she was struggling financially in her first apartment in Scottsdale, I felt that familiar tug of obligation. When Madison herself started calling me crying about how hard it was to make ends meet on her retail job salary, I found myself wanting to help despite our history. The phone calls became more frequent over the past 6 months. Madison would describe eating ramen noodles for every meal, having her electricity threatened with shut-off, lying awake at night, worrying about eviction. She painted such vivid pictures of desperation that I found myself lying awake too worried about my little sister, despite everything she had put me through. I had saved diligently since college, living modestly and investing wisely. $15,000 was a significant amount of money, but it wouldn't break me financially. I convinced myself that maybe this time would be different. Maybe Madison had matured. Maybe she would appreciate the gesture. Maybe it would be the foundation for rebuilding our relationship as adults. Standing in that hallway with scattered bills at my feet, I realized how naive I had been. Madison hadn't changed at all. If anything, her sense of entitlement had grown stronger with age. The tears in her phone calls hadn't been genuine remorse or gratitude for having family who cared. They were just another manipulation tactic designed to extract resources from the sister she had always seen as an easy target. The humiliation didn't end with the slammed door. 3 days later, I was sitting at my desk at Morrison Marketing Solutions reviewing campaign analytics for a client presentation when my phone started buzzing with notifications. At first, I ignored them, focused on the quarterly report that was due by end of business. But the buzzing became incessant, so I finally picked up my phone to see what was happening. My heart sank as I opened Instagram. Madison had posted a video that had already garnered over 300 likes and dozens of comments. In the video, she was sitting in her car, makeup perfectly applied, holding up the envelope I had given her. "You guys will not believe what my sister tried to give me for my birthday," she said with a laugh that sounded more like a sneer. $15,000 in cash, like I'm some kind of charity case. Like, who does that? It's so embarrassing and pathetic. The comments were brutal. Friends of hers from high school were posting laughing, crying emojis and making jokes about having a sugar sister instead of a sugar daddy. Someone wrote, "Your sister needs to get a life, lol." Another person commented, "Imagine being so desperate for attention that you try to buy your family's love." But the worst part was yet to come. In her follow-up story posts, Madison had shared screenshots of our private text messages from the past month. Messages where I had opened up about feeling disconnected from the family, where I had expressed genuine concern about her financial situation, where I had vulnerably admitted that I missed having a close relationship with her and hoped we could rebuild our bond as adults. She had taken my most honest, heartfelt communications and turned them into fodder for public mockery. The screenshots included my message where I wrote, I know we've had our differences, but I love you and I want to help however I can. Family should be there for each other." Madison had annotated it with cry-laughing emojis, and the caption, "She's so needy it's actually sad." The humiliation rippled through my workplace within hours. My colleague Jennifer approached my cubicle with an uncomfortable expression. "Hey Jillian, I hope you don't mind me asking, but someone tagged me in a video on Instagram because they recognized your name. Is everything okay with your family situation?" I felt my face burn with embarrassment as I realized that people I worked with were seeing Madison's posts. Jennifer was connected to several people from my hometown through college networks, and apparently the video was making rounds among Phoenix area social media circles. I mumbled something about family drama and tried to focus on my work, but I could feel the curious glances from coworkers for the rest of the day. My phone kept buzzing throughout the afternoon. Old high school acquaintances were reaching out with messages like, "Saw Madison's post, are you okay?" and "Yikes, family drama much." Each notification felt like another small humiliation, a reminder that my private pain was now public entertainment. The worst call came from my mother. "Jillian, I need you to explain to me why Madison is posting videos about you on the internet." Linda's voice was sharp with disapproval. "This is embarrassing for the whole family. People from church are asking me about it." I tried to explain what had actually happened, how I had offered help and been cruelly rejected, but Linda cut me off. "You know Madison is sensitive about money issues. You should have been more tactful about how you offered help. Now she feels humiliated, and frankly, so do I. People are going to think we raised you kids to air our dirty laundry in public." The conversation was like being transported back to childhood, where somehow Madison's bad behavior always became my fault. I was the one who should have known better, should have been more understanding, should have anticipated how my actions would affect the family's reputation. Never mind that Madison was the one who chose to broadcast private family business to hundreds of strangers on social media. That evening, Madison posted another video, this time sitting in what appeared to be an upscale restaurant eating what looked like a very expensive meal. "Thanks to everyone who supported me today," she said, raising a glass of wine to the camera. "Some people think money can buy love and forgiveness, but I know my worth. I'm not for sale." The irony of her eating an expensive dinner while claiming to be too poor to pay rent was apparently lost on her followers, who continued to praise her for standing up for herself. The final blow came the next morning when I discovered that Madison's video had been shared in a Facebook group for people from our hometown. Hundreds of people I had grown up with were now aware of our family drama, many of them commenting with opinions about my character and choices. Former classmates who barely knew me were weighing in on whether I was trying too hard or being controlling with my family. I realized that Madison hadn't just rejected my gift, she had weaponized it. She had turned my attempt at generosity into a public narrative where she was the victim of an overbearing, pathetic sister who tried to buy love. She had taken something private and painful and transformed it into social media content designed to generate sympathy and attention for herself. What hurt most was understanding that this humiliation had been intentional. Madison hadn't posted that video in a moment of anger or hurt feelings. She had carefully planned it, applying makeup, choosing her location, crafting her message for maximum impact. She had deliberated about sharing our private conversations and decided that her social media engagement was more important than my privacy or dignity. Lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling of my Denver apartment, I felt a level of hurt that was different from our childhood conflicts. This wasn't sibling rivalry or competition for parental attention. This was calculated cruelty from an adult who understood exactly how much damage she was inflicting. Madison had taken my love and twisted it into a weapon against me. 2 weeks after the social media humiliation, I was finally starting to feel like I could move on from the incident when my phone rang at 7:30 in the morning. The caller ID showed my credit monitoring service, which seemed unusual since they typically sent email alerts rather than calling directly. "Miss Crawford, this is David Park from Secure Credit Monitoring. I'm calling because we've detected some unusual activity on your credit report that requires immediate attention. 3 new credit card accounts were opened in your name yesterday, each with substantial credit lines. Given the rapid succession of these applications, we wanted to verify that these were legitimate requests." My stomach dropped as David read off the details. 3 different credit cards from major banks, each with credit limits between $8,000 and $12,000. All 3 had been activated and used for purchases within hours of approval. The total available credit was over $30,000, and according to the representative, nearly all of it had already been maxed out. "I definitely did not apply for any credit cards," I told David, my voice shaking. "I haven't applied for new credit in over 2 years. This has to be identity theft." David guided me through the initial fraud reporting process, but he warned that I would need to contact each bank individually to dispute the accounts and file police reports to document the theft. As I hung up the phone, I felt a sinking suspicion about who might be responsible for this. The first bank I called was Pacific Financial, where one of the fraudulent accounts had been opened. After navigating through phone trees and security questions, I reached a fraud specialist named Carol who was able to pull up the account details. "I can see that the application was submitted online yesterday afternoon," Carol explained. "The applicant provided your social security number, date of birth, and employment information. They also correctly answered several identity verification questions about your credit history and previous addresses." My blood ran cold. The security questions banks used were based on information that would be nearly impossible for a stranger to know, but painfully easy for a family member to answer. Questions about previous addresses, where I had lived, the amount of my student loan payments, the name of the bank where I had my first checking account. "Can you tell me what address was used for the application?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Carol read off Madison's apartment address in Scottsdale, the same apartment where I had been humiliated just 2 weeks earlier, the same apartment where Madison had tearfully claimed she couldn't afford the rent. The pattern became clear as I called the other banks. Each application had been submitted from Madison's address using personal information that only a family member would possess. The purchases made on the cards painted a picture that made my betrayal complete: designer clothing from Nordstrom, expensive dinners at upscale restaurants, spa treatments, even a weekend stay at a luxury resort in Sedona. While I was agonizing over whether to help my struggling sister, she had been living luxuriously on credit cards opened fraudulently in my name. The tears during our phone calls, the stories about eating ramen noodles and facing eviction, the desperate pleas for financial help. All of it had been lies designed to make me feel guilty while she secretly stole my identity to fund her lifestyle. The most devastating discovery came when I requested detailed transaction histories. The dates of the purchases aligned perfectly with Madison's social media posts over the past month. The expensive restaurant where she had made her "I Know My Worth" video had been paid for with my stolen credit. The designer outfit she wore in her birthday celebration posts had been bought with a card in my name. Even the luxury spa day she had documented with selfies and stories about treating herself had been funded through identity theft. I spent the entire day on the phone with banks, credit agencies, and police departments. Each conversation required me to repeat the humiliating details of how my own sister had stolen my identity. The process was exhausting and demoralizing, made worse by the knowledge that my credit score was being destroyed, while Madison continued posting carefree content on social media as if nothing had happened. The Phoenix Police Department detective assigned to my case, Maria Rodriguez, was sympathetic but realistic about the challenges ahead. Family identity theft cases are often the most difficult to prosecute, she explained during our phone interview. The perpetrator usually has legitimate access to personal information, which makes it harder to prove criminal intent. Your sister could claim she had permission or that there was some misunderstanding. Detective Rodriguez walked me through the evidence I would need to build a strong case. Bank security footage, computer records showing the location of the application's documentation of my financial losses, and proof that I never authorized the accounts. She also recommended that I check my grandmother's accounts and other family members' credit reports, since identity thieves often target multiple victims within the same family. That suggestion filled me with a new dread. If Madison was willing to steal from me what was stopping her from victimizing our elderly grandmother or our parents, the thought of 82-year-old Grandma Rose becoming Madison's next target made me feel sick with worry. As evening fell and I finally finished making all the necessary phone calls, I sat in my apartment staring at the stack of fraud affidavits and police report numbers I had collected throughout the day. The financial damage was significant. My credit score had plummeted, and I faced months of bureaucratic hassles to restore my financial standing. But the emotional damage was far worse. Madison hadn't just stolen money from me. She had stolen my ability to trust my own family. She had taken my genuine concern for her well-being and turned it into an opportunity to commit crimes against me. While I was losing sleep worrying about her fictional financial struggles, she was literally stealing my identity to live a lifestyle she couldn't afford. The cruelest part was realizing that the social media humiliation had been a calculated distraction. While everyone was focused on the drama of her rejecting my gift, Madison was busy using my personal information to open fraudulent accounts. She had turned my attempt to help into a public spectacle precisely because she needed to deflect attention from her criminal activities. That night, I lay awake wondering how long she had been planning this betrayal. Had she been collecting my personal information during our phone calls about her financial struggles? Had she been testing my responses to see how much guilt she could generate? Had every tearful conversation been a reconnaissance mission designed to gather the details she needed to steal my identity? The Madison I thought I knew, the troubled but ultimately lovable sister I had been trying to help, didn't exist. In her place was a calculating criminal who saw family relationships as opportunities for exploitation rather than sources of genuine connection and support. 3 days after discovering the identity theft, I was in the middle of another frustrating phone call with a credit card company when my phone buzzed with an unknown Arizona number. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Is this Gillian Crawford?" The voice was male, uncertain, with a slight nervous edge. "My name is Derek Walsh. I'm Madison's landlord, and I think we need to talk about your sister." I felt a chill of apprehension. Had Madison told some lie about me to her landlord? Was this another layer of her campaign to damage my reputation? "I'm not sure what Madison might have told you, but—" "She didn't tell me anything," Derek interrupted gently. "Actually, that's part of the problem. Look, this is going to sound strange, but I think Madison has been stealing from you, and I have evidence that might help your case." The conversation that followed was unlike anything I could have anticipated. Derek explained that he wasn't just Madison's landlord. He had been her boyfriend for almost 3 years before she cheated on him 6 months earlier. He had purchased the apartment building as an investment property partly because Madison had convinced him they had a future together. Madison moved into the building when we were dating. Derek explained. After I found out she was seeing other guys, I wanted her out, but Arizona tenant laws made it complicated. I had to follow proper eviction procedures even though she destroyed our relationship. Derek's voice carried a mixture of hurt and determination as he continued his story. The thing is, during those last few months when I was trying to get her evicted legally, I started paying attention to discrepancies in her behavior. She would cry to me about being broke, then I'd see designer shopping bags in her apartment. She claimed she could barely afford groceries, but I'd smell expensive takeout food when I was doing maintenance in the building. What Derek told me next made my hands shake with anger. He had been collecting Madison's mail as part of the eviction documentation process, and over the past month he had noticed credit card statements and correspondence addressed to me arriving at Madison's apartment. Initially, he assumed it was a mistake or that I was helping with her bills, but when he heard through mutual friends about the social media drama surrounding my gift, he realized something more sinister was happening. "I've been documenting everything," Derek said. "I have photos of the mail pictures of expensive purchases she's brought into the apartment, even recordings of conversations where she contradicted her own lies about her financial situation." Derek suggested we meet in person so he could show me the evidence he had collected. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop in Scottsdale, halfway between his property and the police station, where I would need to file additional reports. The man I met 2 hours later was nothing like what I had expected. Derek was tall and lean, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the type of person who looked like he belonged in a university library rather than dealing with criminal tenant issues. He carried a thick manila folder and a laptop bag approaching our meeting with the methodical preparation of someone who had been planning this conversation carefully. "Before I show you what I have," Derek said as we settled into a corner booth, "I want you to know that Madison put me through 3 years of emotional manipulation and financial abuse. What she's done to you is part of a pattern, not an isolated incident." Derek opened his laptop and showed me a timeline he had created documenting Madison's behavior over the past year. The timeline included photos of luxury purchases arriving at her apartment, copies of bills and statements that proved she had more money than she claimed, and even screenshots of social media posts where she contradicted her own sob stories. "Look at this," Derek said, pointing to entries from 2 months ago. Madison posted on Instagram about a girls' weekend in Las Vegas, complete with photos of expensive hotel suites and designer shopping. But that same week, she called me crying because she said she couldn't afford her electric bill. The documentation was extensive and damning. Derek had photos of Madison bringing home shopping bags from stores like Gucci and Louis Vuitton during the same time period when she was supposedly struggling to buy food. He had recorded phone conversations where Madison told different lies to different people about her financial situation, sometimes claiming she was broke while simultaneously bragging about expensive purchases to friends. Most importantly for my legal case, Derek had noticed and photographed several pieces of mail addressed to me that had been delivered to Madison's apartment over the past month. Credit card offers, bank statements, and other financial correspondence that Madison would have needed to successfully apply for fraudulent accounts in my name. "She's been having your mail redirected to her address," Derek explained. "Probably through a temporary forwarding service or by calling the credit card companies directly and claiming she was you. It's a common identity theft tactic." Derek's evidence painted a picture of systematic fraud that went far beyond the impulsive behavior of someone in genuine financial distress. Madison had been planning and executing identity theft with calculating precision, using her knowledge of my personal information and her ability to intercept my mail to build a comprehensive false identity. "There's something else," Derek said, his expression growing more serious. "Madison hasn't been living alone in that apartment. She's been subletting rooms to random people she meets online, collecting cash rent from them without declaring it to the IRS or getting proper tenant permissions from me. She's probably making an extra $2,000 a month that way. This revelation hit me like a physical blow. While Madison was crying to me about being unable to afford her rent, she was actually making a substantial profit by illegally subletting her apartment. The financial desperation that had motivated my guilt and concern was completely fabricated. Derek leaned forward with an intensity that surprised me. "Jillian, I want to help you build a case against Madison, but I also need you to understand that she's dangerous. Not physically, but emotionally and financially. She's a predator who targets people who care about her. The reason I've been collecting all this evidence is because I knew eventually she would go too far and someone would need proof of what she really is." As our conversation continued, Derek shared details of his relationship with Madison that mirrored my own experiences with unsettling accuracy. The pattern of manipulation, the calculated tears, the way she would create crises to generate sympathy and extract resources. Derek had experienced it from a romantic partner's perspective, while I had endured it as a sister, but the fundamental tactics were identical. "She's going to keep escalating until someone stops her," Derek warned. "Identity theft is serious, but based on what I've observed, I don't think she'll stop there. She's gotten away with manipulating family and friends for years. In her mind, she's invincible." By the time we finished our meeting, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this ordeal began: hope. For the first time, I wasn't facing Madison's manipulation alone. I had an ally who understood her tactics and had documentation to support my case. Derek's evidence could be the key to ensuring that Madison faced real consequences for her actions rather than charming her way out of trouble as she had done so many times before. Derek walked me to my car as the sun was setting over the Arizona desert. "One more thing, Jillian. I think Madison is planning something bigger. She's been acting more desperate lately, taking bigger risks. Be careful and don't let her know that we've talked. If she realizes we're working together, she might do something really dangerous." Derek's warning proved to be prophetic sooner than either of us anticipated. 5 days after our coffee shop meeting, my phone rang at 6 a.m. with a call that would change everything. The caller ID showed Rose Crawford. My grandmother's name, but the voice that answered was shaky and confused in a way that immediately set off alarm bells. "Jillian, honey, I need your help." Grandma Rose's voice was barely above a whisper. "I went to the bank yesterday to get money for my grocery shopping, and they told me my savings account is empty. They said someone withdrew all $38,000 last week, but I never did that. I don't understand what's happening." My heart started racing as I realized Madison had expanded her criminal activities beyond identity theft. "Grandma, are you at home right now? Don't talk to anyone else about this until I get there. I'm driving down from Denver today." The 4-hour drive to Phoenix gave me time to coordinate with Derek and Detective Rodriguez about this new development. Derek met me at Grandma Rose's house in the retirement community where she had lived since Grandpa died 5 years earlier. The small, tidy home with its carefully maintained garden felt like a sanctuary of innocence that Madison had violated. Grandma Rose looked fragile and bewildered as she showed us the bank documents. Someone had used power of attorney papers to access her account, claiming authority to handle her financial affairs due to her age and health concerns. The signatures on the paperwork looked authentic, and the bank had accepted them without question. "Madison came to visit me 2 months ago." Grandma Rose explained, her voice gaining strength as she remembered details. "She brought papers for me to sign, said they were medical directives in case something happened to me. She was so sweet and concerned, talking about how she wanted to make sure I was protected. I signed them because she's family and I trust family. Derek and I exchanged glances as we realized how carefully Madison had planned this theft. She had manipulated an elderly woman's trust and concern for her own welfare to obtain legal documents that gave her access to life savings that represented decades of careful budgeting and financial security. The bank security footage that Detective Rodriguez obtained later that day showed Madison confidently walking into the bank with the forged power of attorney documents. She had dressed professionally, carried herself with authority, and spoken with bank personnel as if she had every right to be there. To the bank employees, she appeared to be a responsible granddaughter handling financial matters for an aging relative. But the most chilling detail emerged when we examined Madison's social media activity from the week she stole Grandma Rose's money. She had posted constantly about a luxury shopping spree in Scottsdale, tagging expensive stores and restaurants, documenting purchases that clearly cost thousands of dollars. She was flaunting her spending spree while our grandmother sat confused and frightened about her missing life savings. Derek pulled up Madison's Instagram on his phone and showed us a particularly devastating post. Madison was holding shopping bags from high-end stores with the caption, "Sometimes you have to invest in yourself, living my best life and not apologizing for it." The post was time-stamped just hours after she had emptied our grandmother's bank account. "She's not even trying to hide what she's doing anymore," Derek observed grimly. "She's gotten so arrogant that she's documenting her crimes on social media." Detective Rodriguez explained that the elder abuse charges would be far more serious than simple identity theft. Financial exploitation of elderly persons is a felony with significant penalties in Arizona. Combined with the identity theft charges, your sister could be looking at federal prosecution and substantial prison time. We decided to coordinate our response carefully. Derek would continue monitoring Madison's activities at the apartment building. Detective Rodriguez would work with federal authorities to track the money trail, and I would stay with Grandma Rose to provide support and ensure she was safe from further manipulation. That evening, Grandma Rose and I sat on her porch watching the desert sunset, and she shared memories of Madison's childhood visits. She was always such a charmer. Grandma Rose reflected sadly. Even as a little girl, she knew exactly what to say to get what she wanted. I thought it was just normal childhood behavior, but looking back, maybe the signs were always there. The breakthrough came 2 days later when Derek called with urgent news. "Madison is packing everything into her car," he reported breathlessly. "She's loading suitcases, boxes, everything. I think she's planning to run." Through careful investigation, Detective Rodriguez discovered that Madison had booked a flight to Miami using money from Grandma Rose's account. She had apparently decided that the heat was getting too intense in Arizona and was planning to disappear before law enforcement could build a complete case against her. "We need to intercept her before she gets on that plane," Detective Rodriguez explained during an emergency conference call. "Once she leaves Arizona, the investigation becomes much more complicated and she might disappear entirely." Derek had been monitoring Madison's movements throughout the day, tracking her progress as she made final preparations for her escape. She had cleaned out her apartment-closed local bank accounts and even had her mail forwarded to a post office box in Miami. Her planning was methodical and thorough, suggesting she had been preparing this exit strategy for weeks. The plan we developed required precise timing and coordination between multiple law enforcement agencies. Airport security would be alerted to watch for Madison. Detective Rodriguez would coordinate with officers positioned near the departure gates, and Derek and I would serve as backup identification to ensure they apprehended the right person. As we drove toward Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport that evening, I felt a mixture of nervousness and determination that I had never experienced before. For years, Madison had manipulated situations to avoid consequences for her actions. She had learned that tears and charm could get her out of almost any trouble, that family loyalty could be weaponized to protect her from accountability. But this time was different. This time she had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, hurt people who couldn't be unhurt. Her crimes had real victims and real consequences, and no amount of manipulation would change the evidence against her. Derek squeezed my hand as we parked in the airport garage. "Whatever happens in there, you've done the right thing," he said quietly. "Your grandmother's life savings, your credit, your trust, none of that was Madison's to take. She made her choices, and now she has to face the results." Walking into the airport terminal, I thought about all the times over the years when Madison had escaped accountability through family protection and social manipulation. Tonight, that pattern would finally end. The confrontation at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport unfolded like a scene from a crime drama. Derek and I positioned ourselves near the security checkpoint, while Detective Rodriguez coordinated with airport police and federal agents. Madison's flight to Miami was scheduled to depart at 9:45 p.m., giving us a narrow window to intercept her before she disappeared. At 8:30 p.m., we spotted Madison approaching the security line, pulling 2 large suitcases and carrying an expensive designer handbag that I recognized from her recent social media posts. She looked confident and relaxed, like someone heading off on a well-deserved vacation rather than fleeing from multiple felony charges. The arrest happened quickly and efficiently. Federal agents approached Madison as she reached the document check station, identifying themselves and asking her to step aside for questioning. At first, Madison maintained her typical charm, smiling and acting confused about why they would want to speak with her. But when Detective Rodriguez read the charges against her: identity theft, elder abuse, financial fraud, and money laundering, Madison's facade cracked completely. She spotted me standing with Derek near the security area, and her expression transformed from confusion to pure rage. "You did this?" she screamed across the terminal, her voice echoing in the departure area. "You couldn't stand that I didn't want your pathetic money, so you made up lies about me. You've always been jealous of me." The scene drew stares from other travelers as Madison continued her outburst, accusing me of fabricating evidence and destroying her life out of sibling rivalry. Even while being arrested for serious federal crimes, she was trying to manipulate the narrative and cast herself as the victim. But the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. When airport security searched Madison's luggage, they found documents that proved the scope of her criminal activities. Bank statements showing the stolen money from Grandma Rose's account, credit cards in my name, forged identification documents, and even a notebook containing personal information about other potential victims. More damning was the discovery of nearly $20,000 in cash hidden throughout her luggage. The money represented proceeds from her various fraudulent activities, and its presence proved that Madison's claims of poverty had been completely fabricated. Detective Rodriguez later told me that Madison's arrest had triggered a broader investigation that revealed the true extent of her criminal behavior. The FBI had discovered evidence of similar fraud schemes targeting multiple victims across several states, suggesting that Madison had been running sophisticated cons for much longer than anyone realized. The trial, which took place 4 months later, became a showcase of Madison's systematic, predatory behavior. Witness after witness testified about being victimized by her manipulation and fraud. Derek's testimony about their relationship was particularly powerful as he methodically documented 3 years of financial and emotional abuse, with records and evidence that painted a clear picture of Madison's methods. Former college roommates testified about tuition money that mysteriously disappeared from shared accounts when Madison had access. Ex-boyfriends described loans that were never repaid and credit cards that were opened fraudulently in their names. Previous employers reported embezzlement and theft of both money and confidential customer information. Perhaps most devastating was the testimony of an elderly cancer patient named Harold Jenkins, who revealed that Madison had run a fake charity scam targeting people undergoing chemotherapy treatment. She had collected thousands of dollars in donations claiming to support cancer research, but had instead spent the money on luxury vacations and designer clothing. Grandma Rose's testimony was heartbreaking but powerful. Despite her 82 years, she spoke clearly and firmly about how Madison had exploited her trust and stolen her life savings. She described the fear and confusion she felt when she discovered her account was empty and the sleepless nights wondering how she would afford her medications and basic living expenses. Madison sat in my kitchen and held my hand while I signed those papers. Grandma Rose testified, her voice steady despite visible emotion. She told me she loved me and wanted to protect me. I trusted her because she's my granddaughter. I never imagined that someone I loved could steal from me so deliberately. The evidence presented during the trial revealed a pattern of behavior that went back years, possibly even to Madison's teenage years. Financial crimes, identity theft, emotional manipulation, and elder abuse formed a consistent pattern that showed escalating criminal behavior over time. Madison's defense attorney tried to argue that she was a troubled young woman who had made poor choices, but deserved mercy due to her age and lack of prior convictions. However, the prosecution's evidence demonstrated that Madison's crimes were not impulsive mistakes, but calculated schemes that required extensive planning and showed complete disregard for her victims' well-being. The most damaging evidence came from Madison's own social media accounts, which had documented her luxury lifestyle while she simultaneously claimed poverty to her victims. Posts showing expensive vacations, designer shopping sprees, and upscale dining experiences, all time-stamped during periods when she was supposed to be financially desperate, painted a picture of someone who viewed fraud as a lifestyle choice rather than a last resort. When Madison finally took the stand in her own defense, her testimony was a disaster. Under cross-examination, she contradicted herself, repeatedly became defensive and hostile, and ultimately revealed the sense of entitlement that had driven her criminal behavior. "I don't understand why everyone is making such a big deal about this," Madison said during one particularly damaging exchange. "Families help each other. Jillian has always had more money than me, so why shouldn't I use her credit? And Grandma wasn't using that money anyway. It was just sitting in a bank account." Her complete lack of remorse or understanding of her victim's suffering sealed her fate. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Judge Patricia Williams was clearly disgusted by Madison's behavior when she delivered the sentence. "Miss Crawford, you have systematically exploited the trust and love of family members and vulnerable individuals for your own selfish gain. Your crimes show a pattern of predatory behavior that demonstrates a complete lack of empathy or moral compass." Madison was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation, along with restitution orders that required her to repay every penny she had stolen from her victims. The judge also ordered her to undergo psychological evaluation and counseling to address what the court psychologist had identified as antisocial personality disorder. As Madison was led away in handcuffs, she maintained her defiance to the end. She refused to make eye contact with me, or Grandma Rose showed no remorse for her victims and continued to project an attitude that suggested everyone else was wrong and she was merely misunderstood. But the legal victory felt hollow compared to the emotional satisfaction of knowing that Madison would finally face real consequences for her actions. For the first time in her life, she couldn't charm or manipulate her way out of accountability. The evidence was too strong, the victims too numerous, and the crimes too serious for her usual tactics to work. Outside the courthouse, Derek put his arm around my shoulders as we watched the news crews report on Madison's sentencing. "It's finally over," he said quietly. "She can't hurt anyone else now." But I knew that the real healing was just beginning. The legal justice was important, but rebuilding trust, repairing relationships, and learning to move forward would take much longer than any court proceeding. 6 months after Madison's sentencing, I stood in the kitchen of my new home in Scottsdale preparing dinner for an unlikely family. Grandma Rose had moved in with me after deciding she no longer felt safe living alone. Derek had become much more than a friend and ally in our fight for justice, and together we were building something I had never experienced before, a family based on genuine care and mutual respect, rather than obligation and manipulation. The transition hadn't been easy. Grandma Rose struggled with trust issues and frequently worried about her financial security, even though we had recovered most of her stolen savings through restitution and insurance. She would sometimes wake up confused temporarily, forgetting that the nightmare was over and Madison couldn't hurt her anymore. My own healing process involved months of therapy to understand how I had been programmed from childhood to accept Madison's manipulation as normal family dynamics. Dr. Sarah Chen, the therapist Derek had recommended, helped me recognize the patterns of emotional abuse that had shaped my entire relationship with my sister. "You were trained from a very young age to prioritize Madison's feelings over your own well-being," Dr. Chen explained during one of our sessions. "Your parents' favoritism taught you that your value came from what you could give to Madison rather than who you were as a person. Through therapy, I learned to set boundaries and recognize manipulation tactics that I had previously interpreted as normal family behavior. I practiced saying no without guilt, asking for what I needed without apology, and most importantly, trusting my own perceptions instead of automatically doubting myself when someone challenged my reality. Derek's presence in my life had shown me what healthy relationships could look like. Our partnership had begun with a shared mission for justice, but had evolved into something deeper based on mutual respect, honest communication, and genuine care for each other's well-being. He had never tried to fix me or change me. Instead, he simply accepted me as I was while supporting my growth. The support group I started for identity theft victims had grown from a small gathering in my living room to a recognized nonprofit organization serving the Phoenix metropolitan area. Every month, we helped dozens of people navigate the complicated process of rebuilding their financial lives after experiencing fraud, but more importantly, we provided emotional support for the trust issues that identity theft creates. Many of our group members had been victimized by family members, and their stories helped me understand that Madison's behavior was part of a broader pattern of financial abuse that affects thousands of families across the country. The shame and isolation that victims feel when their own relatives steal from them creates a special kind of trauma that requires specialized support to heal. Through my advocacy work, I had testified before the state legislature about the need for stronger protections against elder financial abuse and family identity theft. The legislation we supported would require additional verification procedures when family members try to access elderly relatives' financial accounts, and would create harsher penalties for crimes targeting vulnerable populations. Grandma Rose had become one of our most effective advocates, sharing her story with lawmakers and community groups despite the pain of reliving her experience. "If my story can prevent one other family from going through what we went through," she often said, "then something good will have come from Madison's terrible choices." The relationship with my parents had required the most delicate reconstruction. Linda and Robert struggled to accept that their favoritism and enabling had contributed to Madison's criminal behavior, but gradually they began to acknowledge the harm their parenting choices had caused both of their daughters. Family therapy sessions were difficult and sometimes contentious, but slowly we began building new patterns of interaction based on honesty rather than the old dynamics of Madison-centered crisis management. My parents were learning to see me as an individual rather than just Madison's responsible older sister, and I was learning to have relationships with them that didn't revolve around managing Madison's latest drama. Madison herself had become a non-entity in our family discussions. She had written letters from prison attempting to manipulate us into supporting her appeal or providing money for commissary expenses, but we had all agreed not to respond to her communications. Dr. Chen called it gray rock strategy, becoming so uninteresting and unresponsive that the manipulator eventually loses interest in targeting you. The most unexpected healing came through my relationship with Derek, which had taught me what it felt like to be valued for who I was rather than what I could provide. Our love had grown slowly and organically out of mutual respect and shared values rather than the desperate need fulfillment that had characterized my previous relationships. Derek proposed on the anniversary of Madison's sentencing, not because of the legal milestone, but because we had both learned through our ordeal that life was too precious to waste time on anything less than authentic connection. Our engagement celebration was small and intimate, focused on the people who genuinely cared about our happiness rather than those who might attend for social obligation. As I looked around my kitchen that evening watching Grandma Rose teach Derek her famous chocolate chip cookie recipe, while jazz music played softly in the background, I felt a peace that I had never experienced during my childhood. This was what family was supposed to feel like: safe, supportive, and built on genuine affection rather than fear and manipulation. The deep life lesson that emerged from our ordeal was both simple and profound. The most loving thing you can do for someone engaging in destructive behavior is to refuse to enable them even when that person is family. True love sometimes requires setting boundaries that feel cruel in the moment, but ultimately serve everyone's highest good. Madison's imprisonment had been devastating for our family in many ways, but it had also freed all of us from the exhausting cycle of crisis and drama that had defined our relationships for decades. Without Madison's constant manipulation, we had discovered who we really were when we weren't constantly managing her emergencies or walking on eggshells to avoid triggering her anger. 6 months later, I received word that Madison was eligible for early release due to good behavior in prison. The news didn't terrify me the way it might have a year earlier. I had learned to protect myself through boundaries, legal documentation, and most importantly, a support network of people who valued truth over family mythology. The woman who had once been so desperate for family connection that she would sacrifice her own well-being was gone. In her place was someone who understood that real family protects and nurtures each other, and that blood relations alone don't create obligation to accept abuse or manipulation. As Derek and I planned our wedding and discussed starting a family of our own, I felt confident that we could break the generational patterns of dysfunction that had shaped my childhood. Our children would grow up in a home where love was unconditional, but behavior had consequences where family loyalty meant supporting each other's growth rather than enabling each other's worst impulses. The story of Madison's betrayal had taught me that sometimes the people who hurt us most are those we love most deeply. But it had also taught me that healing is possible, that justice can prevail, and that authentic relationships are worth fighting for even when the path requires letting go of toxic connections that have defined us for years. Standing in my kitchen that evening, surrounded by people who truly cared about my well-being, I understood that I had finally found what I had been searching for my entire life. A family built on love rather than obligation support, rather than manipulation, and truth rather than convenient fiction. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and protecting yourself from someone who was hurting you? How do you think you would handle discovering that a family member was stealing from you or other relatives? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more true stories about family justice and finding the strength to stand up for what's right. Don't forget to share this with anyone who might need to hear about setting healthy boundaries with toxic family members. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that you deserve relationships that lift you up rather than tear you down.